Matrix. The all, outside of which therefore nothing. If I say nothing, it is necessary for me to posit the all that includes them both. Within this framework, then, these variations, all, which requires a nothing, and then an all that is both. And so the following, each all determines a nothing, and requires that one posit a superior all. That is the schema of all stratification. And the nothing, am I just going to enumerate it? Why not? But I could also just as easily keep it always the same, especially since it always gives rise to the same operation. One could say that nothing is the cause of stratification, of the multiplication of all. Why not say that it is also the same all that repeats itself, rewrites itself, always comes one more time? The unique operation that repeats itself is written. It starts with all, then nothing, and then all. Nothing causes the reduplication of all, or rather, it is the interval between all and itself. All and all are the same, with nothing between them. One can say an entity including nothing is split, that is to say, at a distance from itself, constrained to repeat itself. Its nothing unceasingly separates from it, and it unceasingly reabsorbs its nothing. What is the key to this process? It is that, at the start, I integrated to the entity its negative, its lack, its own disappearance, its effacement. I considered its own absence as being a part of itself. Its own absence, one might say. What could this be except its place? To inscribe a mark is to posit two things. The mark is its materiality, as a trace of ink, for example, and its place. If one effaces the mark, its trace remains, in the form of the place. So, make a mark. It disappears, but its mark remains. Thus, aren't there always at least two series, that of marks and that of lacks? From this nucleus, one could create a cycle that would indefinitely lead from all to nothing, from entity to its disappearance, flickering and eclipse, alteration, the equivalent of two alternating symbols, or rather, the alteration of a symbol and its lack, that is to say, the repetition of a single symbol. We will easily deduce that nothing is not all, given that there is no integral all that doesn't include its own lack. Either the all leaves nothing outside and is not complete, or it includes it, and the lack that integrates perforates it. Here one grasps the formal equivalence between repetition and splitting. What appears in the former as a process, formal as a process appears in the latter, condensed and contracted as entity, repetition, splitting, and expanding. There is another conceivable version of this phenomenon. All would neither include nor not include nothing. All would be contradictory entity, or nothing, an impossible element. Or all and nothing are incompatible in the strong sense, for it is not only that they are mutually exclusive, or that they can't be members of the same set, but rather that they provoke, as soon as they are put together in unceasing disruption. They are connected and separated in anatomy that can only be reduced to the process of alteration, in which nothing is always, in more or less, a proportion of all. Behold, I hold in the palm of my hand the juncture of repetition, splitting, lack, place, alteration, contraction, autonomy, and impossibility. And it is not even necessary to start with the all. An entity will do just as well on the condition that it is posited in disjunction, that is to say, as standing out against the all. But to accomplish this disjunction with the all itself assures you right away that nothing escapes from the law, except the nothing, for the place is secondary to the mark. The subject is the effect of the signifier. We will begin again from the unary mark, from any entity, but this already supposes the unary. All of the all isn't this equivalent to the mark? I acknowledge that this assemblage rests on the confusion between the mark and its place, of the mark as designating itself and the mark as designating its place, or between entities a different order. Stratification makes these phenomena, and the apparent beings that propel themselves by it vanish. But it is precisely a matter of the origin of stratification as infinite repetition. One could also prove that the space that corresponds to the mark as such is, of necessity, unstratifiable. In fact, for stratification, it is necessary that the space of the places be already given. The originary signifier situates itself, and its series develops in a unique dimension, a space without levels. Numbers don't yet exist at the unfolding of this series of split, repeated, unary marks, like universal. That's what unary means. Anyways, it is only with the addition of the marks that the numbers begin, or that number begins. In the beginning is the place where there is nothing, but no place without mark, a concept, an index, a point, a mark of the lack of mark. Yet the mark that lacks and the mark of lack are not different types. They are not differentiated. There is the mark. That's all. Related inference is only when the mark disappears through its place appears, and therefore the mark as such. Is this enough to justify our saying that it attains its being only through its disappearance? That it holds only on the side of its lack in a flash? In the movement and the passage, and it is always either too early or too late, or rather, one could say that the mark and lack are not separate, exterior to one another, but entangled, implicated in each other. Lack and mark are like being and signification. It is only by bearing all that it is that the signifier could signify its being. The split does not reduce itself. Repetition does not cease. Alteration does not stabilize. In other words, one can't make an all of this entity, of this set, of these positions. This process, this entity, presents itself as untotalizable, or as a contradictory totality, which is to say, a totality with its contradiction, or with its non-integrable element. Multiplicity irreducible to unity. The mark, the universal unit, split entity, doesn't remain stable. It multiplies, it diverges, it dispenses with itself, it disseminates, it doesn't consist, it is inconsistent, it persists, it insists, it is a process, and one can say the same of the corresponding totality. Thus, the mark as unity is only the totality concentrated, and the totality is the mark expanded, multiplied. Whoever starts with the disjunction necessarily finds dissipation, In fact, what is a signifier if not an element that only defines itself in a set of similar entities, and by disjunction, that is its differentiation? The limiting case is that of a set with one element. The element doesn't just separate from the set as empty, which is only its own lack, or from its place as such, or from the mark of its place, which amounts to saying that it is split. The element must emerge for the set to exist. It must exclude itself, must accept itself, must show as a defect or a surplus. That is the process of dissipation. It is only a version of the splitting, or of the anatomy of mark and lack. The argument is simpler concerning a number of signifiers. There is no all of signifiers. If it is true that each one defines itself in relation to, for, the set of the others, each signifier for its correlate a set, and there is as many of these sets as there are signifiers, without ever reaching the whole set. This totality, unclosed, perforated, open, it doesn't hold together. It is a unity of space, law, and function, of dissipation, a proverb. Structure isn't everything. No. Reflection, the different beings that have produced entities, totalities, processes, operations, sequences, are they not all equivalent? According to the account I chose, they are identical or different. The phenomenon that I described earlier, condense or expand, are either concentrated or extended, either dwindle or proliferate. There is only one of them, and there is infinity. To grasp one is only provincial. It can cancel itself out, make itself disappear, or swell, stretch itself, divide itself, distribute itself. One could completely sum up the existence of a split entity, concentrating in it an irreducible contradiction, but this contradiction would extend to the universe of discourse in its absolute totality. That is contradictory and split. Are there one or more singular points in that universe? And what if this were completely all there were? Singular? Are they? These phenomena are ungraspable by nature, and one grasps one of them only by taking its fluidity away from it for a moment and placing it elsewhere. The ungraspable could be grasped on the condition that the ungraspable is isolated as a function, to identify it and concentrate it, for instance, by embodying it in an entity. For example, the twisting of a Mobius strip is everywhere. In other words, it is indeterminate, and only a cut in the strip localizes it, precisely when it makes the Mobius strip disappear. Here we define an essentially indeterminate being, since it disappears in being determined. Statement. There is no universe of discourse, which is to say, there is an essential constitutive lack, a hole in the universe of discourse, or better, the universe of discourse is a totality of dissipation. It is a Mobius strip, non-orientable, with one face, without top or bottom, unstratifiable, except if cut at the point where its twist is fixed and effaced, indivisible. This perhaps divided universe, what it loses is not material, it is incorporeal. It is nothing. Only its properties disappear completely. With the fall of lack, the impossible element, the universal stratification of language becomes possible. Seen from the side of stratified language, it is nothing but an illusion. It's an intelligible operation, a non-entity, an appearance, a mirage, a semblant of being that disappears. The categories of more than less than, that of the categories of more than and of less than, of the inconsistent totality, of the antinomic element give rise, if you will, to those of anticipation, of the lightning flash, of the instant, a theory of time before a theory of space. That is the aesthetic of the signifier. Since the beginning, we are in the too early or the too late. We speak, we write, we live in the too early or too late. Does this text come on time? Certainly not. It is untimely. Its production is indeterminate. Neither does it have an end, and when I stop, it will not conclude. Does it remain only to write indefinitely until death, expanding each phenomenon, the phenomenon naming it always anew, testing diverse orders, new metaphors, or else reduce the all to a unique point, a single description, a single cry, a name, or maybe just silence?